For 70 years, the unwritten rule of North American defense was simple. Washington leads and Ottawa follows. But last week, that silence was shattered. Something happened in the Canadian capital that no one, absolutely no one, predicted. When Industry Minister Melanie Joly stepped up to the microphone, she didn't just criticize a fighter jet program. She effectively handed the United States a military divorce paper. By openly declaring that the F-35 offers not enough value, Canada didn't just reject a contract, it challenged the very foundation of American dominance on the continent. This is the scenario the Pentagon feared most, a Canada that no longer accepts "Made in America" as the default. Under the guidance of a new economic doctrine, Ottawa is gambling everything on a European partner that offers what the US never could: sovereignty. But is this a masterstroke of independence or a dangerous mistake that will invite the full wrath of the American empire? Welcome to the new North American conflict. For decades, the relationship between Ottawa and the US defense industry was defined by a single word: acquiescence. Canada wrote the checks, and American contractors delivered the hardware. Eventually. It was a cycle of polite diplomacy where strategic concerns always outweighed economic reality. Even when costs ballooned and delivery timelines slipped, Ottawa stayed in line. To disrupt the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program was seen as politically suicidal, a third rail that no Canadian minister dared to touch. That is precisely why Melanie Joly's recent press conference felt less like a briefing and more like a detonation. Standing before a room of stunned reporters, the industry minister stripped away the usual diplomatic sugarcoating. Her message was blunt, cold, and calculated. She stated, on the record, that Canada has simply not received enough from the F-35 consortium. Not enough jobs, not enough benefits, not enough value for the billions Canada has poured in. This wasn't just political posturing. It was the airing of a deep-seated grievance that Canadian aerospace executives have been whispering about for years. The F-35 program was originally sold to Canada not just as a superior fighter jet, but as an industrial bonanza. Canada was promised meaningful participation in the global supply chain and thousands of high-tech jobs. But the reality has been starkly different. While Canada poured capital into development costs, the vast majority of the high-value engineering, systems integration, and manufacturing work remained firmly locked south of the border. Canadian firms were often fighting for scraps, competing for minor component contracts, while American giants feasted on the bulk of the profits. By calling this out publicly, Joly did something revolutionary. She signaled that the era of defense dependency is over. It was a declaration that Canada is no longer willing to subsidize the American military-industrial complex in exchange for protection. It was the first open challenge to U.S. defense dominance on the continent since the Cold War, and inside the Pentagon, the message was received loud and clear. The blank check has been canceled. Washington had reason to be concerned because at the exact moment Melanie Joly was voicing her frustration, another actor had already stepped into the spotlight, offering Canada something the United States never had. Just as the echoes of Joly's criticism were reverberating through the halls of Parliament, Saab's senior leadership touched down in Ottawa. They didn't arrive quietly, and they didn't come with a standard sales pitch. They came with an unsolicited proposal so comprehensive and bold that it caught even seasoned defense analysts off guard. They weren't offering a simple aircraft sale. They were proposing a total industrial transformation. The numbers were staggering. Saab promised the creation of up to 10,000 high-quality Canadian jobs, spanning advanced manufacturing, aerospace engineering, software development, and research clusters. Their message was unmistakable and designed to strike at the heart of Canadian economic insecurity. Canada wouldn't just fly the Gripen E, Canada would help build it. That single pitch instantly shifted the entire debate. For years, the U.S. model had been take it or leave it. The F-35 is a black box. Its software is proprietary, its maintenance is centralized in the U.S., and its supply chain is dictated by Lockheed Martin. But Saab offered the opposite: full intellectual property transfer. They proposed building a dedicated Gripen center in Canada, giving Ottawa complete control over the aircraft software, mission systems, and future upgrades. Rumors suggest that key members of Canada's aerospace sector had been anticipating a proposal like this for years. It was the holy grail of defense procurement, a deal that aligns military spending with domestic industry growth. While the F-35 program funneled profits back to American factories, the Gripen proposal meant that billions of Canadian tax dollars would stay within the Canadian economy, circulating through local suppliers and tech firms. It was no longer just a choice between two fighter jets. It was a choice between two philosophies of war. The F-35 is a technological masterpiece, a flying supercomputer designed to integrate into the massive American war machine. But it was created with a specific global strategy in mind: shock and awe. It was built for long-range strikes, for coordination with naval carrier groups, and for operating out of massive, well-equipped air bases. It is a Ferrari: high performance, incredibly expensive, and requiring a pristine environment to function at its peak. That is not Canada's environment. Canada is a land of ice, isolation, and brutal winters. Its northern air bases frequently hit -40, conditions that wreak havoc on sensitive stealth coatings and delicate electronics. The F-35 requires complex climate-controlled infrastructure to maintain its stealth capabilities, infrastructure that simply does not exist in the remote corners of the Canadian Arctic. Enter the Gripen E. This fighter wasn't built for projecting power in the Middle East. It was born in the snow. It was engineered by Sweden, a nation that faces the exact same strategic reality as Canada: a massive, frozen frontier and the need to defend it independently. The Gripen was designed for dispersed operations. While the F-35 needs a heated hangar and a team of specialized engineers, the Gripen can land on a frozen rural highway, refuel and rearm in 10 minutes using a small ground crew of conscripts and a single supply truck. It is the rally car to the American Formula One racer. It thrives where the infrastructure ends.
This comparison transformed the debate from technical to political. If the Gripen fits Canada's geography like a glove, why had Ottawa committed billions to a jet optimized for American wars? The F-35 began to look less like a defense asset and more like a luxury import, one that Canada couldn't afford to maintain and couldn't effectively use to defend its own sovereign north. The realization was damning. Canada had been buying equipment to fit into America's plan, rather than equipment to defend its own home. Ultimately, the technical debate over cold weather performance serves as a cover for a much deeper, more uncomfortable truth. Canada no longer trusts the stability of the United States. For generations, Ottawa's foreign policy was built on the assumption that the U.S. was a benevolent protector. But under the return of Donald Trump, that assumption has crumbled. The illusion of continental stability vanished the moment tariffs were weaponized. One month it was aluminum, then steel, then dairy, and then the threat of crushing duties on electric vehicles. Canada realized that depending too heavily on the U.S. was no longer a strategy, it was a vulnerability. This realization is the cornerstone of what analysts are calling the Mark Carney doctrine. Prime Minister Mark Carney has been quietly rewriting Canada's economic philosophy piece by piece. As a former central banker, he understands risk management better than perhaps any leader in the G7. His version of foreign policy doesn't revolve around diplomatic niceties or pleasing Washington. It revolves around sovereignty, industrial autonomy, and economic security. Carney's calculation is simple. If the U.S. is willing to tear up trade agreements like USMCA on a whim, what guarantees that they won't use the F-35 supply chain as political leverage? In a world where parts, software updates, and munitions are controlled entirely by the Pentagon, Canada's Air Force exists only as long as the White House allows it to. This is where the Saab proposal aligns perfectly with the new Canadian strategy. It isn't just an aircraft alternative, it is a philosophical alternative. By choosing a partner like Sweden, a nation that understands the necessity of self-reliance, Canada buys itself an insurance policy against American political volatility. The Mark Carney doctrine dictates that if Canada spends billions, it must result in Canadian assets that cannot be switched off by a foreign leader's tweet. The F-35 represents the old Canada, a junior partner content to ride in the sidecar. The Gripen represents the new ambition, a nation that builds its own engines, owns its own code, and holds the keys to its own defense. But making that jump requires nerves of steel, because declaring independence from the American military-industrial complex is not a move that goes unpunished. And as Ottawa prepares to pivot, Washington is already preparing its response. If Canada proceeds with this pivot, rejecting the F-35 for the Gripen, the reaction from Washington will not be polite, quiet, or restrained. It will be a direct confrontation. To the American political establishment, this wouldn't just be a lost contract, it would be viewed as an act of defiance in their own backyard. The backlash would arrive in 3 devastating waves. First, the White House. Donald Trump has repeatedly demonstrated that he views alliances as transactional. If Canada stops buying American protection, the economic punishment will be swift. We are not just talking about angry tweets. Analysts predict targeted tariffs on Canada's most sensitive sectors. The auto industry in Ontario, cross-border energy flows, and aluminum exports could all become hostages. Trump would frame the rejection of the F-35 as an insult to American workers, using it as political fuel to squeeze Ottawa at the negotiating table. Second, the lobbyists. Lockheed Martin is the largest defense contractor in history, with deep influence in nearly every U.S. state. A cancellation of this magnitude would unleash a ferocious lobbying campaign in Congress. Senators and representatives would take to the floor, painting Canada's decision not as a budget choice, but as a betrayal of NORAD. They would argue that by choosing a non-interoperable European jet, Canada is weakening the continental shield, making North America less safe. Third, and perhaps most dangerous, is the silence from the Pentagon. Defense insiders suggest that rejecting the F-35 could trigger a soft freeze on Canada's access to high-level intelligence. There would be questions about whether Canada can remain a full partner in classified joint programs. The argument of interoperability would be weaponized to push Canada to the margins of the Five Eyes alliance. For Prime Minister Carney, this is the ultimate test of nerve. The question is not whether the U.S. will retaliate, that is guaranteed. The question is whether Canada is finally strong enough to absorb to blow, standing its ground to prove that its sovereignty is not for sale, regardless of the price Washington demands. Around the world, the era of unquestioned American military monopoly is quietly collapsing. From Europe to Asia, nations are waking up to a new reality. True security cannot be bought, it must be built. By seriously considering the Gripen, Canada is finally stepping into this global wave, signaling that it values sovereignty over tradition and independence over political convenience. This debate was never just about specifications, speed, or stealth. It is about identity. The fighter jet Canada chooses will patrol the skies for 40 years, but the decision behind it will define the nation for a century. It marks the moment Ottawa stopped asking for permission and started asserting its power. Whatever the final signature on the contract says, the old era is over. Canada has tasted the possibility of a different future, one where it is not a client, but a creator. So, the question is now yours to answer. Should Canada play it safe in Washington's shadow, or is it time to brave the cold and forge a path of its own? Let us know what you think in the comments below.